All right, this is a slimmed down version of the PowerPoint that's posted for today. This is the ecology of populations again, with a specific emphasis on human populations. I'll again go over describing characteristics of populations and particularly the models of growth, and then I'll talk about human populations. Again, lots of this is based on uh, populations that people have studied for a long time. Some of these populations, we've studied them for literally hundreds of years. Trapping and fishing records, forestry records go back hundreds of years and often measure the size of the population, sometimes the number of individuals of each sex and their age. And so it's not based solely on experimental data, although that's important. Again, remember, populations are groups of individuals within a single location. Generally, that location gives them the potential to interact and interbreed, so they share genes. Uh, Often in population ecology, we're concerned about range, patterns of spacing, and then changes in the size of the population over time. Um, and again, um, you know, we this is important in lots of things. Like this is a picture of a tuna. How many tuna can we harvest? Well, it depends. Um, when Again, sometimes organisms seem abundant when they're not, and so we have to estimate them. Patterns of spacing really affect our appreciation of abundance and things like that, and the likelihood that we'll encounter organisms. Some individuals are randomly spaced, others are uniformly spaced. Like there'll be one of these guys every 50 acres or every 100 acres or maybe every 10 feet. Um, and so they're often competing for resources, maybe sunlight or food, prey species, or something like that, or clumped. You find individuals located together. Often they're sharing the same resource, or maybe they depend on each other, like a pack of wolves. For all of these populations, we have two basic models of growth. One is exponential growth, shown here in the red line, when there's lots of resources available and populations are reproducing at a steady rate. And so the number of individuals is increasing rapidly. And then logistic growth, here shown in blue. In logistic growth, um, the number of individuals is affected by the environment. And as they reach a carrying capacity, usually shown as K, that the number of individuals, uh, new individuals, decreases. When we talk about these two types of models of growth, the first one, populations are mostly affected by density independent factors like weather and geology. And then logistic growth is most often affected by factors that are density dependent, like predation, food, and disease. In those logistic growth populations, as the population size n approaches k, which is the carrying capacity, the rate of increase of the population decreases. Okay, and it may actually be negative if the population is larger than k. For both populations, the rate of growth is referred to as R, and R depends on the number of breeding adults, their fertile periods, the number of offspring they produce with each breeding, number of litters that they produce, age, and cost of reproduction. For many organisms, they have very high population growth rates, um, and those organisms are often the organisms that will um, grow at exponential growth rates. And so a good example of that are like locusts. Most years they're not that abundant, but if conditions are really good, they become super abundant. Um, so uh, these factors that regulate populations can affect birth rates, they can affect death rates, they can affect both birth and death rates, and those things are density dependent, and so it kind of acts as a negative feedback to keep the population at or below K. And so that's the carrying capacity. And also, not shown there is migration. Migration is a big thing. We can also talk about populations by their age structure. the number of individuals of each age, pre-reproductive, reproductive, and post-reproductive. We often call those cohorts. Um, and those are determined by birth rates and mortality rates within those cohorts. Um, Age structure can have a really important impact on growth, and there are typical age structures you see of growing populations and of stable or declining populations. And then survivorship patterns are usually expressed as a curve. Here, humans are shown where we have good survivorship until we get old, and then everybody dies. Lots of organisms, it's um, kind of random death rates, like in Hydra, or where there's really high death rates early, and once they pass a critical period, then the death rates drop. Well, where we want to go with this is talking about human populations. And here's a graph showing the human population over the past 10,000 years. And so it shows that we've been basically have that exponential growth pattern that we see in locusts and other small organisms. And particularly over the past, 2,000 years, the population's been growing really rapidly. Okay, so changes in population, we can, those are births over deaths plus immigrants minus migrants who are leaving or immigrants. Um, but those are hard things to figure out for human populations, and humans are pretty variable in their behavior, so it's hard to predict where the human population is going. Here, these are for predictions made in the early 2000s, and those three different predictions, the high, medium, and low, depend upon the fecundity of the human population. Well, humans lower their birth rates depending on population density. And that's really not known, but it's probably known that we're not going to do the high scenario, that we're much more likely to do the median or the low scenario, although population in many countries are still growing, including the United States, even India, one of the most populous countries, but to a lesser extent, China. In fact, this graph was produced in 2006, and India has passed China. And this has to do with birth rates. That birth rates for various countries are much higher than others, and in China they've gone to a one-child policy, which has severely reduced the birth rate. And the reason they did that, of course, was if you look at this map, the population density is highest in China, and so takes a lot of resources to support high populations, and so they did their best to lower population densities. Okay, and that's not also surprising when we see urbanization. So China's worked hard to bring fertility rates down, and they've been pretty much successful. That China's fertility is lower than most developing countries, and China is a developing country. And it more looks like countries that are developed already. And so it looks like the United States, Europe, Japan, their birth rates have declined. And of course, birth rates are highest in countries that are underdeveloped. And part of that is they have lower survivorship. And so people understand we need to have more kids. Okay, so here's some age structures of populations. I mentioned those. Populations that are expanding rapidly have this very pyramidal age structure. Stable age structures are pretty even, with the number of people in the pre-reproductive classes about equal to those in the reproductive class. And populations that are declining have fewer pre-reproductive people and many older people. And that will be us soon. If we don't have immigration, we will be one of those declining populations. So, if we talk about, where is the world's population growth, it's mostly in developing countries. Not all of them. Some have, like China, have instituted policies to control population growth. And overall population growth is slowing, so that it's taking longer to add 1 billion people rather than faster. In the 1960s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, population growth was accelerating. but it is since slowed, and so it's taken longer to reach 8 billion and perhaps longer to reach 9 billion. Okay, why do we have exponential population growth so rapidly? Well, that has to do with changes in technology, particularly changes in technology about the growth, transport, and storage of food, and then also about improved survivorship, particularly among children and mothers. And so that those things that are increasing fecundity and decreasing mortality. Okay, we'll stop there. I'll have a little more new material for you on Tuesday in lab, but otherwise that will be the end of the new material.